I'm Peter Parente. I'm going to co-present this with Gino Bustelo and Justin Tyberg. I'm actually an employee at MaxPoint Interactive down the road. Gino and Justin are here at IBM, but we're all contributors to the Jupyter community, which is the technology we're going to learn about today, the Jupyter Incubator, the new dashboard, and declarative widgets projects. If you haven't heard of them, don't know what they are, that's fine. That's what this tutorial is about. All right. So, as I said, this is going to be very hands-on. We're going to show you how to use these. We're actually going to build a notebook, a Jupyter notebook. Is everyone familiar with what Jupyter is? Notebooks? Put your hands up, please, just so I know. Okay, vast majority. That's good. If not, you'll get a flavor of it. And we're going to write this notebook, and we're actually going to turn it into a standalone web application. That's sort of what these new incubating extensions are all about. And we're going to show you sort of the value and why we do this to begin with. So, to set this up, why would I want to do that? It sounds kind of weird, right? My notebook, I'm going to turn it into an app. Why, right? One of the patterns we've seen with data scientists using Jupyter is, Alice, this fictitious Alice, is a Jupyter notebook user, right? She creates plots, charts, she does some amount of analysis, data munging in a notebook. But now, that's great, she's done her exploration, but she's got to deliver something, right? She's got to hand over an interactive web app, is one of the things Alice might produce, to, her stakeholders, someone else in her business, right? Someone that doesn't want to see all the code that Alice wrote to get to the point that she's at. Someone just wants to interact with the plots, kind of explore on their own, and not worry about Python or R or Julia or any of these things, right? So today, in a large part, Alice must stop. She's done all this work in a notebook, figured things out, and go build a separate web app. And I'm not saying there aren't tools out there that, help Alice migrate her work from a notebook to something else. There's things like Bouquet and Plotly and all these wonderful things. But we're going to show you another approach of actually taking that notebook as is and literally laying it out and deploying it as a separate web application without introducing any other non-Jupyter technology into the mix. So these two new Jupyter projects are going to talk about the dashboard and declarative widgets. They help Alice to, first of all, pull interactive web component widgets into her notebook. Gino is going to go through a lot of this, defining those terms, what they mean. Arranging the widgets in a grid or report-like layout, so you can literally drag the cells around in the notebook to create what looks like a dashboard or a web app. Justin's going to go through a lot of that. We can bundle these notebooks up along with the widgets for deployment, so we can actually say, great, here's all the stuff that made this notebook work here in the notebook server, but now we're going to make it a standalone web app. Right? We can bundle all that up, and then we can serve that standalone web app on our favorite cloud provider, on our desktop machine, a box we got lying around, right? It could be completely outside the Jupyter notebook environment. Okay. So I just sort of described all this. I don't know why the header is showing up on there. Let's see if we get rid of that. There. The overall workflow is work in the notebook, write some code, insert widgets, lay it out. You can kind of see that in the thumbnail over here. Deploy it as a standalone web app. And then, obviously these things are rarely done on the first pass. Iterate, right? Go back to your notebook, add more code, add plots, change it based on user feedback, deploy it again. Right? So the notebook, the value of this, if it's not, coming to mind, or at least the value we saw in this when we seeded these projects, is that it's really meant to facilitate the transition from I'm doing research in a notebook and exploration in a notebook to I'm deploying just good enough web apps, right? I mean, it's meant to complete this data mining cycle going from I'm understanding a business problem, getting data, modeling it, performing analysis, iterating, but ultimately I got to deploy something, right? Something people can put their hands on. And sometimes that's a dashboard. I'm not saying that's always the case. When it is a dashboard, that's what these technologies are meant to address. So what we're going to build today, I was trying to skip to this because this is the fun part. We're going to work on a notebook together that is going to turn into a health inspections dashboard. So we're going to start with all the Durham health inspection data we pulled down from the city site. And in the end, we're going to end up building most of this. I don't know if we'll get through it all. Something where you can, click the name of an establishment. You can see where it's located on a map. You can get the median number of violations per year for that establishment in a low plot. And you can actually group by just filtering. I only want to see pizza joints in Durham. Click those. You can actually see how a particular pizza joint compares to all the pizza joints, right? Is this the place where I want to get pizza or not? And then you can actually, if you can stomach it, look at the violations that establishment received in the past however many months. Right? I think it's by quarter we did it here. Right? So we're going to build good portion of that, not from scratch. We're not going to sit here and type every single line. We're going to give you the starting code, and we're going to focus mostly on the development cycle of adding a little bit of an activity, deploying it as a web app, coming back, adding a little bit more, deploying as a web app, and getting a feel for how the technology works. So how we're going to do it? Well, the first step was everyone was going to get in Slack and get a virtual machine where all this stuff was already set up. How many people are in Slack now? Did anyone have any further luck after they started getting the invite limit? Nobody. Okay. So if there's someone in your row that's gotten into Slack successfully, you're going to have to pair for the moment. I think Gino and Justin are kind of running around and handing out usernames and passwords directly. If you get one of those, you can do it on your laptop. But we're going to give you a notebook server and a dashboard server, these two things in the cloud. That's what we're getting set up for. Justin's going to take us through what's the data we're working with. Right? It's hard to build a dashboard if you don't know what the health inspection data looks like. So we're going to spend a few minutes on that. And then, like I said, we're going to go through this cycle. We're going to run the initial notebook and immediately deploy it as a dashboard so everyone sees right away how quickly you can turn a notebook into a web app. Right? We're going to add a map to it, deploy that. We're going to add the ability to filter, like I showed you in the last video, deploy that. And as time permits, we'll see how far we're going to go in completing the whole thing. We might take a break. This is a 2-hour session. If you get tired, want to walk around, please do. I don't want this to be torture. And at the end, depending on how far we get, I think it might actually be better serve you all with the last 20 or 30 minutes. If, again, you're pairing up and you've got an idea of what you want to try out with this technology, do it, right? And Justin, Gino, and I will actually walk around and help you out instead of us just being talking heads at the front of the room and you following along, right? We'll give you hands-on coaching as much as we can. All right. Okay, so people that are in Slack, the first thing you need to do, yeah?
So I found this notebook on NP Viewer. So I couldn't get it to Slack, but I downloaded the file.
So the question was, if I found the notebook on MB Viewer, I couldn't get into Slack, can I do anything? You're not going to be able to do it because you need a notebook server, a dashboard server, a bunch of the technologies that we tried to pre-deploy. So I think best if you can find someone to sit with, or as soon as we get to run around a bit more, we can help people through, getting one. I think Justin's doing it right now, but it's going to take a minute. So folks that are in Slack, if you go to the direct messages on the left side, should be a little bit of text, direct messages. Click that. Search box should appear. Search for the name tutorial bot. You could just start typing tutorial. Should come right up at the top. Okay. If you're stuck, raise your hand. Gino, Justin will run to you. As soon as I'm done talking up here, I'll run to you. Okay. Hit go on the filter box next to tutorial bot. You should have like a new chat session with a username tutorial bot. Once you've done that, send it the message VM for virtual machine, lowercase VM space please. Okay. So you're asking it for a virtual machine. And some people have figured this out because I can see it responding. So, and what it's going to send you back is a URL like this one, PyData 22, CloudET, a password, and another URL. Just hang on to those. You can open the first one if you want, the notebook one, and type in the password and log in. Just get to that point and then wait. Is anyone that's following along in Slack stuck on the steps I just gave? For the folks that can't get into Slack? I see some people are doing it, so that's good. Okay, how many people have gotten the VM info out of Slack successfully? All right, a few.
Can only one person use one VM, or can people share it?
If you want to share your VM, if you've got a password, you can. Just make sure someone duplicates the notebook to a new name. You can go and open it. So I'll show you how to do that if you're not familiar. Yes, we're going to get to that in 1 second. So hang on. So when you get a VM and you log in to the notebook server, for folks that have done it, you should see this. This bottom notebook right here, inspection dashboard, is the one we're going to work with. So the first person who got the VM, click it, open it, hang on right there. Don't do anything, right? If someone else is going to share your notebook server, just do make a copy, right? Give it a new name. You can keep copy one. It really doesn't make a difference. Have that person log into your notebook server too, and they will use that copy. As long as you're not editing the same one at the same time, Jupyter's not going to like that. Just sit right here. If you get to this point, you're looking at this notebook, hang on. Don't worry, we built in time to take care of VMs. We knew this was going to happen. Is everyone sharing a VM if you can? Yes. Yes, so I'll cut to the end, which is if for some reason you're locked out today, which might be some people, the completed notebook, if you go into the inspection folder here, there is a inspection dashboard complete, which is the entire tutorial. The video will be on YouTube, I think, so you can kind of follow along and do it that way too. And we will post how you can bring up all this on your own. We didn't want people to have to install the entire stack, so. Okay. The question was, will this be available after today? Yes. We'll do our best to make sure everything's there.
But for those that can follow along, please do, because the whole purpose of this was to get you guys clicking the buttons in the notebook, because what we've done is added some functionality. We're really covering 2 notebook extensions, actually several notebook extensions, 3 or 4, but we're highlighting 2 of the notebook extensions that we've added to the Jupyter Incubator organization on GitHub. And it's 2, one is the dashboards capability within the notebook, and then the other one is having declaratively create widgets within the notebook that display as dashboard components, right? So that's what we're trying to get you guys to actually physically put your hands on and play, because if you don't, it's just going to go right over your head. And so apologize for all of the Slack failure here, but in the big gist of it is we're just going to create a very simple dashboard with some data that's from the Raleigh or Durham Open Data website, and we figured most people are going to go out to dinner at some point when their stay is here, so we're going to look at the health inspections information for the local restaurants. Okay, so we're going to build up a dashboard as we go through the notebook. And it'll be fun. You'll love it. So as you go through the notebook, for those that have it open, just the very top, the half of the notebook where you set it up, so you just basically run the cells, right? The only thing that I'll point out here is that this import declarative widgets is the only import that might seem new to some folks, and that is importing the Python side of the declarative widgets code. So the widgets has stuff, remember the notebook is a browser-based interface. It's got web technology backing it. And that web technology is talking through the kernel to some Python code that's running. So we need to import this declarative widgets. Declarative widgets works with R and Scala as well. And that's one of the advantages. Like normal IPy widgets is Python only. So one of the things that we wanted to do with the declarative widgets was to make it so that I didn't matter which notebook kernel I was in. You know, we got 3 kernels supported now. It's the same code that runs on whatever kernel you've got, right? So there's a declarative widgets init, which you have to run as well. But other than that, everything else is much the same as you would do in any other notebook, right? So I want to take a few minutes just to talk about some of the data. Again, all of this data and stuff is on the Jupyter Resources tutorial dashboards declarative widgets GitHub repo. So we're just pulling in data directly into pandas from that URL. And what we're looking at is there's 3 data sets. The first one is called the establishment data set. So this is McDonald's number 27133. The date that it opened, the establishment ID, the inspection frequency. I believe this is per annum, so this is inspected twice a year. What type is the restaurant and where is it located? Lat long coordinates. Okay, nothing too special there. Then we have the inspection data set, and this has the inspection ID, the establishment for which the inspection occurred, the date, etc. The grade, although this extra credit has me thinking they grade on a curve, which I'm not really too comfortable with. But there's a grade of and a score of 100, so good for whatever establishment ID that is. And then the last one is sometimes when they go out for inspections, I can picture the health inspector like writing down on their tablet or something, you know, writing comments about why the score was what it was. So we have a comment ID, what inspection it was related to, and you know, white plastic grocery bags are not food grade, and everyone hates when that happens, right? So what we're going to do is use this data just to bring up and filter by establishment name. We're going to actually bring in a map a little later. Very simple. It's going to take 3 or 4 lines of code, and you're going to put a Google map right under the notebook. So one of the things, just a little pre-munging here, we're taking the establishment lat long, which is a string. You can't really tell from the output of the in the data frame, but this is a string right now, so we're basically splitting it up and creating an array from the lat long coordinates. And then we're doing a little bit of merging here. We're just basically taking each one of the data sets and then just merging it into one, or actually in this case 2 different data frames from which the rest of the notebook will use. So we're basically just merging on the establishment ID. And then when you get to this point, you'll basically be left with, okay, I've got, here's the establishment, the inspection ID, any comments associated with the inspection ID, etc. Right? So nothing you have had to do so far to do any coding. This is just run all the cells top to bottom, and you basically have the data set that we're going to work with. So this is where the new stuff starts. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a widget, and we're going to create a table widget specifically. So the declarative widgets code base includes some widgets like a chart type widget and a table type widget that you can import directly without having to add any other code from anywhere else. Right? And where I'm going with that is the widget stuff is based on Google Polymer. So if Google Polymer has an element or widget, if you're familiar with Google Polymer, many of you probably aren't web developers, but maybe you've heard of it. You can go out and find a Google Polymer element, and Gino will take you through this a little bit later, and just like create UI elements that you would see on your regular web dashboards, your phones and such. So it's built on top of Google Polymer. That's the main point. This particular component that we're going to import, so the flow is I want a widget on my notebook. So you need to import or link the component that you want to draw. In this case, the EarthVis table. So it has a link or your href and what package it's from. In this case, it's from the core declarative widgets, right? So as in you would do in any notebooks, you basically have some Python functions or Python code that you're executing. I'm not going to belabor what this code does, but basically it takes the list of establishments and filters them by name, and then does some nice formatting of dropping duplicates, sorting the values, etc. But it doesn't do anything fancy. You can take a look at the code. But what is new with the declarative widgets capabilities is the ability to bind a widget declaratively to a function that is already in your notebook. Okay, so this is the first example of doing what I just said, which is binding a widget to a function. So you can see that the function name here is called establishment table or table, and it takes an argument of a pattern. So I'm going to type in McDonald's, and it's going to give me all the establishments with McDonald's in the name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a function, and I'm going to say it's going to refer to the establishment table. I'm going to pass in the argument of a pattern, and I'm going to get back the result. And the result from this function is a data frame. And the data frame is going to be stored in a variable called establishment table. Okay? And then I'm going to take another function, another element, in this case, the earthviz table. I'm going to feed it that establishment table result, and I'm going to have it draw it. And that's all there is to it. And it draws the table. Okay? So under the covers, this is actually, as you can see from the magic, HTML. So this is markup that you're writing declaratively, and when you execute this cell, it goes through the widgets framework, contacts the kernel, invokes the function, gets the results back, and feeds it back to the notebook front end. Okay, and then outprints a little bit better, table interface than maybe what Pandas head would give you, right? The default Pandas formatting. So that's cool. I got my first widget, and anybody following along probably has gotten this far, and it has their own widget too. So I can select this. This thing has some, features like I can, sort by columns, and it's a little bit more interactive than just the Pandas output, for example, right? So let's say I want to include this widget as part of a dashboard, right? And it's not just a dashboard for my own sake. The idea is I've got some insights to share, or even just use myself. I want to make it available to others, right? So the whole idea is create a dashboard from it, and then export the notebook as a separate web application. So that is the step that I'm going to take you through now, and this is enabled by the dashboards extension to the notebook server. Okay, so let me go up to you hid my panel. So what you'll notice in the toolbar for the notebook, the dashboard extension adds a couple of things. So there's the default notebook view, which we're all familiar with, but then it adds this dashboard authoring view or layout view, right? And if I click on this, it basically turns the dashboard view into what we call layout mode, right? And the idea is you can show and hide cells that you want to show up in your dashboard. So you're selectively choosing which notebook cells you want to appear within the dashboard, right? So we've done this ahead of time, set up the layout for us. So all the other notebooks that you're not showing, all the cells that you're not showing in the dashboard view show up under here, under hidden cells. And I could, not that I would ever want to do this, but the import, I could just click on that button, and it adds it up to the location in the notebook where the cell was located. Otherwise, I don't really care about the inputs. I want to hide that, so I'm going to hide it, right? You can do, there's more info to tell you what different types of resizing and moving of cells that you can do up at the top. So you can, for example, hit the shift button, move it around. You can take the edge of the cell, move that around, and it's basically a grid layout that allows you just to manipulate, how you want the dashboard to look and feel. Okay. So this is the first version of our dashboard, if you will. Okay, so we've only got the the table, but soon we're going to add a map. So what I want to do though is I want to show you the full process flow, right? So once I have my dashboard the way that I like it, I can actually go into this new menu item called deploy as, and I'm going to deploy it to my dashboard server, right? So all this does is package up your notebook and deploy it to another server that's running on this VM called the dashboard server. This is also an incubator project within the Jupyter incubator repository, or organization, I should say. But what you'll see is I'm not running on the notebook server anymore. I'm actually running on a separate dashboard server. And this is good because now, you know, I'm working in my notebook. It's my authoring environment. I'm fiddling with things. I'm munching with data. I'm exploring the data. I might come up with this visualization. Hey, you got to take a look at this. And that's what this is geared for. Like, here, let me create a quick dashboard for you. Export it to a dashboard server, and you give this link to the dashboard server to whoever you want to share it with, right? And then you can go back to the notebook that you're authoring in and continue progressing in your analysis, etc. But it's a completely separate server is the main point, okay? So any questions so far about what we just did? And I don't know if anyone's following along and able to do this, but you guys should be able to do exactly what I just did in your own notebook. So there's a blank space here which is going to contain a map. So if you click on the pencil icon in the map, you basically are taken to the notebook cell view where we have a couple to do items. I want to add a map widget, so I have to get a drink. Okay. So what we're going to do is, everyone likes maps. I'm going to import a Google map, literally. So there we go. Let's see what I'm doing. There we go. Okay. So for those following along, if you want to type this in, okay, I'll take you through what it's doing. It's going through, it's just a relative importing of a component. The component is a Google map, and it's basically a hierarchical, just like any URL. Earth components, Google map.html. And it's in the package, Google Web Components, Google Map, okay? I'm also importing a map marker because what good is a map unless you can like place things on it to see where you're looking. So I'm also importing the Google Map marker, and it's also packaged in the Google Web Components. Okay. So by doing this, what declarative widgets does is it brings that component in, and you might have seen it like add a hidden output here. But it brings those components in. It literally downloads them in to your notebook and makes them available to your notebook. Okay. So I don't know if anyone's like literally typing this in or wants to. But while you're doing that, I'm going to go to the next section. Oh, jeez, goodness gracious.
Does it make sense to make a checkpoint for these wrong functions?
Yeah, who is actually following along or able to? So, oh, good. About half of you. Again, I'm sorry about Slack. Okay. So if anyone has trouble with that link, just ask Gino because he never messes those up. Okay. So we have this table element in our notebook, in the declarative widgets framework, right? And it's called the establishment table. But what I didn't show you, or didn't really pay much attention to, is there's a selection, and I've got to zoom back out because if this thing jumps around if I am zoomed in. So there's a selection here in the EarthVis table. And what that means is when I select something in the table, I want it to be stored as establishment selection or EST selection as that variable. And the reason that we do that is that variable then becomes available to other widgets, which is what I'm going to show you. So I linked my map. What I really want to show in my map is the lat and long of the selected establishment, right? So I basically do the same earth core bind, and it's Google Map, right? It matches this Google Map HTML. So when I do an element, Google Map, I'm going to call it map, giving it a height of 500 pixels, and I'm going to feed it the latitude and longitude of the establishment selection, right? So this is where it gets a little bit, well, I've never seen this syntax before. This syntax is basically Google Polymer elements, right? So if you get stuck and like, what do I feed this? Literally, Google Polymer has a Google Map element with long documentation page about what it takes as parameters, what fields, attributes you can give it, etc. Lat and longitude is one of them clearly. And what we're doing is we're taking establishment selection, which is an array now. The establishment selection row in the table. So we take this row, and I select it, and I take the lat long column, and it's an array. So the first element is the lat, and the second element is the long, right? So let me go back down to the map, and that's all we did here, right? So that's all this code does, and I execute the code. And there I have my map, okay? So it's a little hard to see because of the resolution here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to the layout view. And you can see here, there's my map. And the interaction, let me move this back out so they're at the same level here. So the interaction is such that when I select Arby's, it updates the map. So all of this, these two widgets are on the notebook page communicating with one another, okay? That's the gist of what we're showing you here. We've basically tied this widget to some function in the back end notebook kernel, and I say I'm interacting with the widget, and it's selecting the actual row in the table, and then it's feeding the row to the map, okay? And all we've had to do that was those little bits of markup to get the map in and to display the table and bind them to the functions. So I'm going to do real quick deploy the new dashboard to my notebook server. I'm sorry, my dashboard server. Get rid of the old one. And the map might take a little bit of time, clearly, to pull down or render. Oh, no. It's because I didn't select anything. So the map doesn't know what to show. So if I select, hopefully, comes down. My map's not showing. Maybe. Okay. Well, it didn't show, but that's okay. Let me do, yeah, I went back to dashboard mode. Let me do this real quick. Let me go back down to my map. And I'm actually going to add a marker here. So that I can actually see what I'm looking at. So similar to the Google Map, within a Google Map you can display markers. So I just include another element, Google Map marker, and I feed it the exact same location. So basically I'm going to center the map on the establishment location, and I'm going to put a marker at the establishment location. Okay, very simple. And there it is, right? So now if I go back to the dashboard view, and I select my elements, then the map follows suit. Okay? So what I do want to make sure is though that when I deploy it still works. Okay. Now it's not cooperating. All right. I don't know where I put it. All right. So let me do this real quick. Actually, does it matter because he's going to take over. All right. So where did we put the Jupyter resources? So by the way, guys, Jupyter resources, tutorial dashboards, declarative widgets. Under notebooks, there's a completed notebook here in case anybody wants to take a look. Go through it. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm cheating. Sometimes Google Maps misbehaves. So what I'm gonna do is add a little script to my Google Map to force it to refresh. Okay, let's go here. Let's do that. All right. Okay, so there we go. Right, so if anyone's having trouble displaying their Google Map in the dashboard server, then the completed notebook has the little workaround script to force Google Maps to behave. And I think that's it.
Put your hand up too if you want help. One of us will wander around. Just do that throughout the talk.
Gino, you're up next though. Yeah, I'm done. So I'm going to hand this off to Gino because Gino's team is the one. Gino worked for IBM Cloud Emerging Tech, and we've been working with notebooks for quite a while. And he led the team to develop the declarative widgets. So he's going to show you a lot of cool stuff you can do to, talk about widget features and capabilities. So I'll hand it over to Gino.
Let me show you real quickly. We actually have a notebook. So on all the VMs that you guys are running, there's a completed notebook right there. The thing is that don't use that as your work in progress guide, because if there's people sharing the notebook server and you have many people log into the same notebook, problems happen. So if you click on your notebook home, you'll see that there's an inspection folder right there. And in that folder, there's a completed notebook. And if you want to copy and paste and not type, I understand. You can copy and paste from that one into the one that you're working through a tutorial, and that's perfectly fine. Any other questions? Okay. And I might actually end up doing that at some point, maybe. Make sure I'm set up here. Close the wrong window. There's a little, there's a defect that shows its head on Chrome that sometimes you don't see the cells don't open. If you resize your browser, everything goes back to where it should be. All right, so that was a very quick kind of rundown through a lot of features, especially the declarative widgets features. So what I wanted to do was kind of take it slower and simpler examples so you can kind of understand some of the the things that you gain from using declarative widgets, some of the special features that declarative widgets bring to the table. Now, having said that, the dashboard server and the dashboarding technology is not married to declarative widgets. So if you want to use any other library for doing widgeting or visualizations, you perfectly fine. Think about the dashboarding as just a way of laying out the final look of your notebook so you can share it. And declarative widgets is yet another tool in your toolbox that if you want to use it, hey, go to town. So backing it up a little bit. So the reason it's declarative widgets and the reason we're typing angle brackets in HTML, which I know a lot of people are like, ugh, type angle brackets, right? One of the goals of declarative widgets was really to build a framework for creating reach areas in your notebook, but that can translate very easily to a variety of language that the notebook supports. And from our team's perspective, we're very interested in Spark, and so we wanted to create a system that could operate on the different languages Spark supports. So that's Python, R, and Scala. And if we would have taken an approach that was purely driven by Python, that meant that we'd have to port all that API and all that code over to many different platforms. Plus, we didn't want to go into the whole deal of inventing a new widget toolkit. We don't want to implement new type of button or a new type of slider or anything like that. There's a dime a dozen out there. So what we actually centered on is let's go the declarative way, specifically web components. So who here understands the term web components? Just a few. All right. So web components is a nice extension to the HTML spec that allows you to create a completely new element in HTML. So you're not narrowed by just the elements that could come built in with HTML, but rather you can define your own tags that bring in, look and feel, behavior, API, etc. So the good example is that Google Map tag right there. That doesn't exist in HTML. That is actually what we call a web component. Someone wrote or wrapped the behavior of a Google Map into an element that just by dropping it on an HTML page, now you get a map, right? Polymer, you heard Polymer. Polymer is really a framework from Google that makes creating web components easier. It also brings some goodness for using web components in applications like data bindings and some templating techniques that I'll show you a little bit about. So by adopting web components and Polymer, we gain open access to an ecosystem of widgets that we don't have to write. We didn't have to write Google Map. And actually, Google Polymer comes with a wide variety of widgets that basically now you can plop them into your notebook. Now what's missing is how do you connect those widgets to the code that you're writing in the notebook, your Python code, your Scala code, your R code, your data frames, all that kind of stuff. That's the core value of declarative widgets, is that glue code that lets you take a completely visual widget and tie it to data that's sitting on your kernel, right? So to kind of showcase that, what I figure is we'll hang around in this area of the notebook. So if you find the area filter by name, see, so we're going through it. We're trying to complete our dashboard, but we're going to hang out in this area for quite a bit. This first thing, which Justin showed you very quickly, is how do you bring in those third-party components that we don't want to write, but they're out there in the ecosystem? How do we bring those web components in? So for this part of the notebook, what we want to do is allow the user to type in a restaurant name and then filter the table by that name. So we need some sort of input control. So when I do this, the first thing I do is I go to the Polymer catalog that Google provides. And Google has a collection of controls under what they call the paper elements. And they have a very well-documented ecosystem of web components here. And so you can find, so this is why I didn't want to write a widget toolkit. Look, everything is here, right? And we can use it now. But we're going to use paper input, right? And it's very well documented. It shows you how to use a paper input element. It actually even has demos, so you can see what a paper input element looks like and play with it. So not only can you see the documentation, but you can kind of test it out and see it, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our notebook, and we're going to, I'm going to clean this up completely. And we'll go back to templates in a second. So I'm going to add a paper input element, and it's just like HTML, very basic HTML. We're trying to not bombard you with web development sort of topics or web. So it's basically all tags and attributes. Question? Oh, sure. And I can also, there you go. So I'm going to add paper input, and I'm going to run it. And hey, nothing happened. Well, that's because the notebook doesn't know where this paper input guy is declared. So the same way you got imports in Python to bring code in, modules in, you need to tell the browser where is this paper input guy live and bring it into the notebook. Now, like Justin says, this is where I probably pretty much 99% of the time I mess something up, but we'll see we get in the first try. So the way you bring elements into using web components is typically you use a link tag. That's an HTML tag that's used to bring resources into the browser. And so it's just a link tag. You open and close it, right? It has a rel attribute that's called import. And it has an href attribute, which is you see, I was going to make a mistake already. An href, which is the location of the component that you're going to bring in. And typically on a Polymer app, this is all you need. You need to point it to some URL. That's where the component is. The browser load it, and boom, you got paper input. But declarative widgets has an extension to this tag, and it's called, the way you extend existing HTML components is with the is variable, the is property, and it's called earth core import. Right? And it's an extension to earth core import. And what that allows us to do is to define the package where that element is defined. Now, why do we want to do this? Because unless this element is actually living on some CDN that you can bring it from the network, you need to actually install the package for this widget in your notebook. And we've basically encapsulated all that behavior in one tag. So if you put a link tag with a package and give it a special href, the notebook server is going to bring down the paper input element, install it on your notebook server, and then serve it to the browser, and you're done. You didn't have to go to command lines and understand things like Bower and all that kind of stuff. So where do you get these values from? So you actually get them from the same place that you look at documentation for example, paper input. If you look at over here on the left side, there's a command to install the component if you were doing a web project. So we need this string here, which is a location of a GitHub repo, paper elements, paper input. So you can see that. And that goes into package. And that's just telling our extension, go grab paper input from this GitHub repo, install it. Now we got to tell it, bring it into the browser. And we have this special, pretty much all the time you're going to be using Earth components. It's a special path where we put all these elements as you install them. And typically the name is paper input / paper input.html. And just so you understand where that's coming from, if I go to my paper input element and I click on source, it actually jumps me to the GitHub repo where that element is defined. And usually when you install this in Bower, or install this using Bower on a web project, it creates a folder with the name of the project, which is paper input. And then the definition of the paper input element is in this paper input HTML file. So pretty much for all paper elements, it's the same pattern. You go and grab paper elements for the package, and then you import paper input. Now, the moment of truth. That's built into the package manager that installs it. It defaults to GitHub. And I think you can use other things to point it to other repositories or other source code repositories. Now, the moment of truth. Did I do it right? And I did. I said I get a prize for that.
First time.
The first time. But what happened there? It didn't install in this case because I already run this, so it had installed. For you guys, it's probably going to take a little bit longer because it's going to install the code on the browser on the notebook server. But then it actually loaded that file in, and you see how it actually promoted what was missing before. I didn't run that cell. It just promoted that element into something usable, and now I can just say, woohoo, first try. All right. So that's our paper input. Pretty simple. Now that we have the paper input here, let's give it a label because we want to start making it look usable. So you just use the label attribute. So far, there's no declarative widget specific things here. This is just basically how you interact with what components. And we're going to call it filter establishments by name. Right? Rerun the cell, and it has a nice little message there that tells you what to do. So I can type, whatever, Taco Bell, something. And you see that animation? That's just eye candy that you got for free, basically. Now, let's say I wanna populate it with a value. I can do it. I can give it a static value, for example. So I can just say value. That's the property that contains the value for the element, and I can type hello, run it, and it says hello, right? So that's great, but that's just a static value, a static button. I can't do pretty much anything with that, but it's there, it's installed. What we want to do next is we want to be able to take the value of what the user types into that paper input and be able to use it to filter a table, right? So let's get to that point. And I'll introduce another concept of declarative widgets, which is usually pretty much whenever you create an area of the notebook that has declarative widgets, you want to wrap it with some templates. No idea why it keeps jumping on me. You want to wrap it in this temp. Sorry guys, it's the Zoom thing, doesn't. Right? And then we're gonna use a special type of template. Again, remember when you're actually extending an existing element in HTML, which template happens to be an element in HTML5, you use the is property, and we're gonna bring our own extension to template called earth core bind. All right, so simple enough, nothing changes. You just basically now you have the paper input inside of a template. Well, what we want to be able to do is grab this value, and by having it inside this template of earth core bind, we can start using data binding syntax to basically create the value of that input into some sort of variable that we can pass around and tie it to other things. So just to give you a quick example of that, and I'll explain this very quick. There's this data binding syntax, and this is from Polymer, and you can use it here in declarative widgets. If you use double curly braces, you're basically defining a variable in this template, and we're going to call it input value for now, right? And if you want to see what that value is, you can actually put it somewhere else in a template. So here, I'm going to say input value and close it in square brackets. Now, why the difference between square brackets and curly braces? Think about it. This is the two ways that you bind variables. If you use curly braces, you're basically can detect changes going in. So in changes, react to changes to the variable. But also, if paper input changes input value, it exposes an event. So it's in and out. Whereas the square bracket only goes in. So it only receives changes to that event. So I'm going to run that, and there you go. You have a bound area. So what's happening here is that I'm typing in the paper input, and the span is populating itself. No JavaScript, no weird scripting, no nothing like that. It's just done. It works. Now, what's actually even cooler, think about it. We need to actually connect this to this function that's sitting higher up on the notebook. So one of the things that this earth core bind template gives you is the ability to do variable bindings and eventing across notebook cells. So if I go below here, I'm just going to copy real quick. Let's say sorry for the jumping around. I'm going to remove the paper input from the second template, and I'm going to remove the span from the first template. Run both cells. I forgot my HTML magic here. Don't forget the HTML magic, you need it. And now we got cross-cell binding. So we have two different islands of rich widgetry communicating with one another, right? And that's something that you get with that Earth Core bind extension to template. Now, that's cool. That's all happening in the browser. What if you want to interact with that variable from your Python code? And if you were in Scala, with Scala, if you were in R, with R. So there's a set of APIs that you can actually bring into your Python code that allows you to play, interact with the data on the browser side. So if we go here and we say, from declarative widgets, import channel. Channel is a special function that we get with declarative widgets. And so we can do channel, and channel is a function, so at least an empty argument. And you do a set, and let's say we called our variable input value, and I'm just going to copy paste it, so I tend to mistype a lot of things. And let's say hello from kernel, and run that. You see everything updated to hello from kernel. So now we're actually talking from Python to the browser through that variable. Nothing special, just that name. It's pretty easy, right? Now, let's do one more thing. What if I want to react to that variable changing in Python code? So channel, yeah, sorry. So channel, sorry, this is going to keep happening because the maximizer keeps. Is it fine if it's down there? Or, let me see. I'll try it again. I don't know what the browser's doing. Can you see about down there? All right. So I'm going to use a different variable, a different function called watch. So watch basically allows us to tie a handler to that variable. So we're going to do input value, and we're going to pass the first parameter is the name of the variable. The second parameter is a function, any function. So I'm just going to call it handler, and I'm going to come right here to the same cell, and I'm going to define a function called handler. That basically the signature of that function is the old value and the new value of the variable. And to show that function running, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a different value. Sorry, I'm going to zoom in and out because this thing is not working good. So inside of that function, I'm going to set a different value. Let's call it from kernel. And just for fun, we're just going to say new, and we're just going to reverse that string, right? And run it. Everything seems fine. Now we need to read that variable doesn't exist in our template, so we won't see it. So for now, I'm just going to take from kernel, and I'm going to reuse this span that we had here, and we're going to use that guy. Now everything was done right. If I start typing here, you see how my value gets reversed. And just think about what's happening. I'm typing in a paper input, an element that we grabbed from the web, we installed on the browser, we bound it to a variable, we have a watcher on Python calling a handler function that reverses that string and sets it back on a different value that I can display somewhere else in my UI. And all in these 4 cells. That's pretty simple. So, say again?
The linkage between input value from kernel, that's that watch.
Yeah, exactly. So the question is, what is the input? What is the tie between input value and the from kernel value? And it's basically the input value is what's getting set when I type in the paper input. Then the watch, this watch right here, notices the event that that it changed, and it calls a handler, and the handler is just setting yet another variable come from kernel, which I'm displaying in this span up here. So it's going from browser to kernel, kernel to browser, basically. All right, so that's one key feature of very important feature, kind of building blocks of declarative widgets, being able to use variables, being able to do data binding across templates, across cells, talking to the bindings from the kernel and to the browser and the other way. Just very quickly, there's this concept of a channel. That's why the method is called channel. There's a channel that's connecting, that's routing all the data across the templates and the kernel. And they have names. By default, all templates that don't specify a channel, they're using a channel name default. But just to show you real quick, if I had a lot of variables and I need to separate them, I can give the template a channel name. And so now, you see when I'm writing here, nothing happens on that span. And that's because this watch handler is setting the variable on the default channel. But if I change this code here and just pass A, and now, A, B, C, D, E, it all works, right? So now I can actually, if I'm getting too many variables in one channel, I can separate it by namespace and cross talk through channels. All right, so let's get rid of that. So if you remember, the whole point of this paper input, I'm going to come back to this again, is that we wanted you to enter the restaurant name and we wanted to tie it to a function. And Justin did a great job of introducing the function topic, but I'm going to elaborate a little bit more and simplify it a little bit so you can understand what's happening. So remember, there's this function called establish est underscore table. And that's the one that we want to pass our typed in pattern to it. And the way we do this is yet another core feature of declarative widgets is the ability to take a function that lives in the kernel on whatever language, R, Python, Scala, and make it a resident of the browser so that they can participate in all this data binding goodness that's happening browser side. And so the earth core function element is what does that. So let me go back down here to our friend, the paper input, and let's just do some quick examples here. So let's start by creating a function. So to keep with the theme of reversing, I'm gonna create a function reverse that takes input, and then it returns input reverse. Right. All right. So just to test it out, make sure I didn't make a mistake. This is niceness of the notebook. You test the code to your right. Yeah, there you go. So it reverses. So now I want to make this available on the browser side. So again, we do %% We're going to put a template here. It's going to be earth core bind. All right. Close our template. And we're going to bring our special friend called earth core function. And we're going to take it step by step so you kind of understand what this guy does. So opening and closing braces. All right. And we're ready. So the first thing we need to do is tell earth core function, hey, what's the function that you want to bring to the browser? And that's with our ref property. And basically, you use a name. So we're going to call the reverse function. So now this tag is tied to the reverse function. And it has some things to help you out. Like if I type a random function, it doesn't exist, it actually gives you an error. This guy is going to the kernel and trying to find the function reverse. And if it doesn't exist, say, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? So we got our function reverse. It takes one input called input. The way that we tie inputs to the function is there's a naming convention. All parameter names are prefixed by arg. So you type arg dash, basically prefixed by arg dash, and input. Right? So that property binds to the input parameter for the reverse function. And we can give it a static variable like a, b, c, d, right? Now, we need to grab the result of executing that function, and that's result. So the return value of the function comes in the result property. And that return value, we support a lot of the basic types of all the languages, plus we support things like data frames, series, Spark data frames. They actually get serialized and come back to the browser without you having to write any code. If you want to extend, you have your own type. You can extend on the notebook, extend the serialization support to support your type, and then we'll support it and return it for you. And it all, since it's coming to the browser, it's coming in JSON format. So here, since I want to read the result and display it, I'm going to put it on a variable, and I'm going to call it the output. And so that's result. And just because we want to see the result, I always like to put a little span in place just so I can see my data. Again, we're only reading the values, so square brackets. And if I can type. All right, run it. And nothing happened. Okay, that's because, yes, there you go. But nothing happened. And why nothing happened? That's because the Earth core function doesn't invoke itself by virtue of putting it there. It needs to be triggered, right? So one quick way of triggering it is to put a button inside that guy, right? So you just put a button inside the Earth core function that renders right here. If you click the function, you click the button, the function executes. So you say turn ABCD into DCBA. Now, let's tie our function, the argument input, to our paper input. So I'm just going to copy input value here, and I'm going to substitute. Sorry, I gotta come back from substitute that guy. We're only reading that value. So I run that, and you see D, E, F, G. Nothing's happening. That's because the function doesn't invoke automatically. I gotta click on the function on the button, and it executes. And that's quite nice when you want to actually have the user have to click on a button to do an action that's gonna run in your kernel. Not always do you want to do things automatically. But what if you wanted to do things automatically? Then you don't need a button. You can actually say to a function, I want you to call yourself auto. And what it does is it detects changes to its parameter values, and whenever the parameter value changes, it executes. So now I can just go in here and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you see it's always getting invoked. Now, picture this. Again, this is very similar to the thing we did with channels, but now we're going through a function. So I'm typing in paper input. That value is getting registered as it's changing, which is an argument to Earth core function, which is tied to reverse. It calls our reverse function executes, brings back the return value, and that output, the output is the return value which I have showing in a span, and it just works. Right? Now, the last thing I'm going to show you here is sometimes you don't want to have to react to every change in the variable, especially if reverse was a big function that had to do a lot of work, that takes a lot of time. So you add a delay. And so you say delay equals, and I'm going to add a 2-second delay. And all this is going to do is create this debounce behavior on the function that as long as I'm typing and I don't stop for 2 seconds, it doesn't do anything. But the moment I stop for 2 seconds, it executes, and you get the return. So all these things put together give you a lot of flexibility on creating an application, basically. You can click a button, you can put delay, automatically call functions, etc. So finally, we're ready to tie our input to our function at the top. And actually, it took a lot of time because I wanted to explain you guys some of those concepts, but all I really have to do is, because we already have an Earth core function at the top, and it's expecting a variable called pattern. I can just copy that variable, go back to my paper input, and instead of using input value, use pattern. And now if I show you the resulting dashboard, now I have my button there, and I can type McDonald's and filters, and it works, right? That's part of the function, so I'll show you. So the function, the actual function established table uses the pattern to filter by the name of the data frame. So it's built into the function that we have already written for you here. Yeah. How are we on time? Good? Okay. Any questions on that? No? All right. So the next thing I wanted to kind of talk briefly about was, so we put the paper input, we tied it to the function. It's doing a filter in a data frame, and this particular function returns the data frame as an output. And like I said earlier, we support these complex types as outputs of functions, and we serialize them and be able to send it out to visualize on the browser. So what's coming out of this result property, which is set on established table, is an actual serialized form of the data frame. And the basics of the data frame is really has two parts. It has the data and it has the columns, and these are subkeys of that variable. So you can see us in the table setting data rows and column to those particular values. Data is a two-dimensional array. Each part of the array is a row, and then you have an array of rows, and then the columns are the names that get displayed on the table. But declarative. So we covered kind of like the core components. There's another core component that I'm not going to talk about, but you guys can look it up. There's a data frame element itself, Earth core data frame, and that is if you just have a data frame sitting on with a name, like a variable set to a data frame sitting on your kernel, you can add this tag and just bring it out to the notebook, to the front end without having to having to create any function to expose it. It just exposes itself. And if you modify that data frame, it reacts and it'll show. So that's a shortcut to not having to create functionality. You can just expose a data frame. But the core elements of declarative widgets are really built to connect to data. Now, we do have a couple of elements that we're actually under the vis namespace, Earth vis, a couple of visual elements that they're particularly free from having to know about the kernel. They're purely visuals. But they all were written to have a common interface to tie itself to data very quickly. So they all connect to data rows and columns. So they all easily accept the data frame. Table is one of them. We have bar charts and other charting components. But the other thing that they support that I think is pretty valuable is this concept of selection. Because if not, all interaction kind of ends on the visualization. But if you cannot click and interact with the visualization and have some other thing happen, then it's like a dead end. That's where your app ends. So in the table, we're actually using that selection property to be able to capture the selected row on a table and then use that to render a particular location on a map. And it all works exactly the same. It's all data binding behavior. So in this particular case, the selection element is est selection, and when I select, that gets set to a row that's selected, and with basically the same data binding syntax, I am actually setting the lat long and the marker on a map. Now, let me just show you something real quick. So if I put a span here, and this is a very handy technique to kind of know what's happening behind the scenes. So what is things set to? I'll show you another one in a second too. If I do that and I select something, you see it says object, and that's because there's two ways of exposing the selection on our visualizations, as an object or as an array. If I remove this selection as object property and run this again and select, you see that it's actually an array with the content of the row. Right? But when I selection as object, what it does, it turns the row into an object that's keyed by the columns. So for example, I can put establish selection dot ID and run that, and as I'm clicking, I'm just pulling that particular part of the record. And that's exactly how we're doing lat long. In this case, if I put lat long here, that's the lat long coordinates. Now, lat long happens to be an array in that data set. So the way you do this, and this is actually part of the Polymer syntactical data binding syntax, you go into arrays using the dot notation. So that's how you get to the first part, which is the lat long, the lat, and if I do the 1, then you see the long, the 2 of that. And that's basically how we're tying the map to the table. All right, so the last thing I want to show you is a little bit of the same, but we're going to now show the data in a bar chart. And we're going to have to do a couple of the same things, but ultimately get to the bar chart. And we can move through this pretty quickly. No questions? Okay. So if you go down to the import bar chart area of your notebook, you see that we've already pre-imported the bar chart element. Now this is one of our elements, but by default, not all our elements are pre-imported in the notebook. The visual elements you have to import manually because they're kind of hefty, and if you're not going to use them, you don't want to have them as part of in the browser. But all our core elements come automatically. Those ones you don't have to import. So what we're going to do here is we have a function that when invoked, it returns another data frame that we can use to show a bar chart. And it shows the violation counts per date. So let's do this pretty quickly here. So we already have our template. And the first thing, since it's a function, we need to bring that function over. So we're going to use earth core function. Right. And we're going to refer to this function right here called median violation counts. And I'm sorry that I'm not zooming in. I'm afraid that it's going to keep bouncing around if I do. And forget about the arguments for now. They have default values, and those apply. So we don't have to set the arguments. Let's just take the result and just set that to violations. So now basically I have tied a function that takes the violations and let's call it automatically. Okay. So that should run. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the earth viz bar, which is a bar chart. And earth viz bar, very similar to table. It's a very similar API. Has data rows that is equal to something and has columns. It's equal to something, right? So we're returning violations, which is a data frame. And so we need to basically take and set this to violations.data. And the columns, we're going to set it to violations.columns. Run that, and there you go. Now we have a bar chart that's also selectable if you want to. I'll leave that as an exercise for you guys to do later if you want to. You can actually tie selection. There's some other functionality that you might want to do based on the selection. You can do a variety of things here. You can rotate labels. Let's do minus 25% degrees. Right? And so it rotates the labels. These are time-stamped notation. We might want to actually change that. There's an element that you can put underneath a bar chart and other charting components called earth viz column or earth viz col, for short for column. And what that allows us to do is we target a column. In this case, we can target it by location. So we want to the first column of this data frame is the date. So we want to target that guy, and we want to say it's a type date, and then we can just say a format for that date. And I think the format, you can do this formatted string notation, very common. on formatters. Like that. Close that tag. Close it here. Run it. If I did that right, I didn't. What did I miss? You see, you guys are paying attention. That's awesome. Boom. Say again?
You've got data rows and columns.
Ah, and it magically worked. That's a feature. Yeah. So there you go. The dates are set correctly. I think the last thing we can do just to like complete it is let's just give the function one of the arguments. So the argument, one of the arguments that it can take is the pattern, right? That's one of the arguments of the function, and we're already storing that pattern in our variable pattern. Right. So now I'm going to just quickly go to this better visualize on the dashboard. If I go here, I'm going to actually move this guy down here above the come on. All right, there, fine. Not there, okay. Where'd it go? All right, okay, where I want it to go. So now Taco Bell. I don't know why I'm picking these restaurants, but all right, and it changes. I didn't put the delay on that function, so you saw it kind of updating as I was typing. That's why it was updating. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Any questions?
Shoot a single point on the map. How difficult is it to actually create paths?
There is some. You've done that, right? Creating paths.
You have to go into that.
Yeah, it's possible.
Is there a function?
Yeah. There's some other elements that you can bring from Google. Let me show you a couple of links. So if you go to the catalog, I just use one element from Paper Elements, but there's these Google Web Components, and they include not only the map, but also you can bring all the things from Google if you want to. But that's the map, and the map has, if you show a demo of the map, I think it has, it can add a polygon and regions and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so you can do some fancy things with the map if you wanted to. We have we've done things with taxi data where we actually show you the route that taxi takes, and we do that with markers. The other, I just want to show you real quick. This is another example. This is another example of a dashboard we created. And if it was running in the dashboard server, you probably would not even know that this comes from a notebook. And this was all done basically if I show you the notebook. This is all just a notebook. It's a lot of cells for interacting with a CSV file that has, in this case, it's food inspection data from Austin, Texas. And when we go to this view, you can search. You can search. You can click. It should, when it works good. You can click, and then you can actually click on a restaurant, see its current score, and then see also how it's trending over time. And all this was done in a notebook, all with declarative widgets and pandas data frames. We have a try site if you guys care to visit. And this one's going to be hard. Let's see. No, it doesn't do. Jupyter.cloudet.xyz. If you go there, our whole stack, albeit it's probably an older version of our technology, but we'll update it. You can actually go there and get similar instances to what we gave you here, and you can play and look for demos and kind of get more information of our stuff. And like if you go to the individual projects under GitHub, or even if you go to this try site, there's more examples. and you can basically see what it takes to build other demonstrations, other dashboards, and then individual examples of how to use the individual elements for declarative widgets. So that's it. So we still have a half an hour, so we could either, you can hear me talk for another half an hour, which I'd rather not do, or
You can take questions.
definitely take questions. Also, you can hack on the notebook, and if you want to try the next part of the notebook that we kind of left undone, we'll stay here and we'll help you out. But it's up to you.
We should do group questions first. We have a microphone. Are there any general questions folks have? Here, one over here.
Is Earth a polymer concept, or is that a declarative widgets concept?
Yeah. So the question is, where did Earth come from? And it's a play on Jupyter, and so it's Jupyter is with a Y, and so we misspelled Earth with a U, and it's just the code name of the project. Yeah.
Naming is hard.
The problem is that it sticks. So now, yeah, it's Earth.
While we finish up the time, also great presentation. Can you put together a markdown file of all the different really cool resources that we've sort of mentioned so far, and maybe post it on GitHub somewhere?
Yeah, so maybe what we can do is do something on the README of the tutorial and just blast, because all these resources are under there's a Jupyter, yeah, Jupyter-resources. So if you go to and GitHub Jupyter-resources, there you go. There's an org called Jupyter-resources, and then all the materials for this tutorial is actually on a repo called tutorial-dashboards declarative widgets. What we'll do is we'll update a README here with all the links and all the goodness, and we'll put it on the channel, and everybody can get it. Yeah. Oh, okay. So, yeah. I don't have an earpiece, so.
Sorry to hog the mic. So you talked at the very beginning about how you had to import declarative widgets, and that was probably not something we would have seen. And when I tried it, it wasn't. I mean, obviously, I would have had to go probably pip it or conda install or whatever.
Yeah.
Is there an analogous piece to get the other side of that, the Jupyter side of that, and how would you do the install, or does that just come with the base Jupyter that you get with any conda?
For declarative widgets, you mean, or in general?
Specifically with declarative widgets.
That link right there might help you, I guess. There's already setups here that you can grab. They're Docker setups that you can install. Now, all our pieces are independently installable, and it's like a pip install procedure. So when you install declarative widgets, for example, it brings the browser side, the server extension, all the extensions to Python if you need them. All that stuff comes in one install. The same with dashboards and other extensions.
Simple question: how do you, after you deploy, how do you kill the web page?
The deployed notebook,
Yeah.
and the dashboard. I guess you just remove it, right?
You mean kill it, like shut it down?
Yeah.
Or so I mean, when we deploy it to the dashboard server, which we really did a couple times, every time a user visits, it's actually spawning a kernel behind the scenes. So this is meant for small usage. But as soon as the user navigates away from the dashboard page, the kernel goes away. So you're not leaking kernel resources and back. If you want to shut down the whole web server, you have to go down and kill the web server instance.
Other questions? Great, and I'll echo what was said over here. Excellent presentation. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, guys.